Hello and welcome to Tonebenders, where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, series, and games. Today we're going to be talking about the delicate art of capturing the sounds of the animal kingdom, from dangerous creatures to the cutest creatures imaginable, and everything in between. We have two fantastic guests to walk us through their experiences with field recording animals. First up, joining us from Malmo, Sweden, we have Mattia Cellotto. He has produced 3 volumes of amazing animal recordings called Animal Hyperrealism, Parts 1 through 3. These libraries are invaluable for my own personal work. It's great to meet you, Mattia. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, thank you.
Awesome. We also have Dmitry Chernov with us from Moscow for this talk. Dmitry has a few animal-based sound effects libraries, including ones covering wolves, that is amazing, and the surprisingly evocative guinea pigs one. Welcome, Dmitry. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
And with me, as usual, we have René Coronado, my co-host. René, what's going on?
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing really great. Maybe, Dmitry, let's start with you. How did you get into the idea of recording the wolves for your sound effects library?
It was 2018 when I decided to do some sound libraries. I have just a post-production background. I even did some location sound, but I decided to just try something new in my life. And I decided that recording nature is what I really dreamed of. So in summer of 2018, I made a 2-week journey to the northwest of Russia. It's close to the border with Finland, so I did this Karelia series of summer recordings, which turned out into 2 sound libraries. One is the forests and meadows, and the other one is the lakesides. But it's more like about birds and so on. Then I decided that I want some animals. And luckily, we visited the Darwin's Museum in Moscow with my kids. And there was advertising that there is a series of lectures about wolves. I attended all these lectures. And it was a gathering of fascinating people, the explorers of wolves, people who make sanctuaries for wolves. And getting in touch with them was so intriguing that it was absolutely clear that I need to do this library.
So you went to a sanctuary for that?
It's a sanctuary or a shelter. The place where the founders, they are just married couple and their sister. They decided to save wolves that were once kept by people. And these people thought that wolves may be pets or toys, keep them at their homes. Of course, they couldn't cope with carnivores, with dangerous animals that need space for their life. They can't live in normal people's homes. Also, they picked up some animals that were exploited for filming or some other stuff. So
Right.
they saved these animals. They can't reintroduce them back into the nature, can't let them back into forests. They don't know how to hunt. So they made this a place where these wolves are kept at best conditions. Best food, health care, and so on. Everything is private and lives on donations from just common people. No help from any for-profit organizations or from the state. Just pure enthusiasm.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's very similar to the situation that Melissa Pons described with her wolf recording expedition.
Yeah.
And that's great that there's something like that up there in the north of Russia as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mattia, do you want to talk a bit about how you deal with what people call gatekeepers, like getting access to the animals? Because you've got a wide range of animals in your library.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, definitely. I gotta say, it's a lot of trial and error there, but I pretty much never say no to anything ahead of time until I see what the situation is. But I've worked with the animals trained for movie productions. I've worked with animals that, well, they're simply in zoos, and I'm just kind of there as a visitor, trying to, the same way that people take pictures, record sounds, and anything in between, animals owned by friends or stumbled across while going for a run or something like that. Maybe I can kind of talk a little bit about the two extremes. So in the case, for example, of Animal Hyperrealism Volume 1, I went to the US, and that was the first time that I spent, that I spent that much time and invested that much money in a trip that I think lasted 3 days. So I was almost more on a plane than I was on the ground in the US. But I arrived in Los Angeles and stayed there for a day and a half. This was, of course, planned well ahead of time, about like 6 months ahead. I visited a location where a lot of animals are kept to be trained for movie productions and so on and so forth. And that was one of the extremes of, highest level of preparation when it comes to the expectations of which animals I could find there and so on and so forth. Despite the fact that rarely pans out the way that you think it would. For example, I went there to record a bear, and there was an agreement that it could be possible, but when I arrived, it was pretty much discarded like from the get-go. But then I ended up recording a camel there, so you win some, you lose some, and that was kind of a lot of preparation, but not a lot of preparation with regards to understanding the animal. So it was the first time that I invested that much. And I think looking back, I could have played it a little bit better. For example, later on, I did something that was a lot more local when I was living in the UK, so still in the UK. I ended up recording lions with a lion tamer, the last one in the UK, which is, of course, a very different career from what you may imagine thinking about that term and thinking about what it meant in the 80s or even 90s potentially. Regardless, in that case, for example, I shipped my blimp to the lion tamer. They got, he allowed the lions to kind of get used to the idea of having a blimp around. And when I showed up, there was almost no interest in my presence. Other times, the situation is completely random in the sense that I will just go on Google Maps, write zoos, animal parks, or whatever else, see what's open on which day, show up, and hope for the best. And most of the bird recordings and so on and so on are gotten that way because for birds you don't need extreme preparation. They're one of the few animals that if you play video from YouTube to them, you have a strong chance of a response. So yeah, I guess depending on the animal, there's a variety of preparation you can do. And when it comes to getting access to those things, to the parks, the right areas, that's again just pretty much doing research and trying to get in touch with the right people before you engage with an individual. You're feeling confident about the welfare of the animals and yourself to an extent, because if you're working with lions, you don't want situations that are slightly sketchy to arise, since slightly sketchy sounds like it may leave a margin for something to go wrong. So yeah, it's pretty different. So yeah.
When you're making that first phone call to a stranger that is in control of a bunch of animals, what's the pitch? What do you say? How do you introduce yourself and try to describe to them what you're looking to get done so that they will actually allow it to happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If it's someone that works in post-production or someone that trains animals for any form of linear media production, I'll try to explain it as if that's what I was doing. Meaning I will say, I need to record vocalizations. I will record video because I always get video for posterity to document everything and so on and so forth. And that's fairly easy, generally speaking. It's often hard to explain how much sound matters to me compared to someone that is a visual person, and how little visuals matter to me compared to a visual person. So with regards to that, it's often funny because someone may say, oh, absolutely no way. No. Where I am, there's just, it's the room is too dark. It's all covered in panels that are made of foam. You'll hate it. And I'm thinking, whoa, it sounds perfect, actually. Please, please, yes. And other times, if it's a zoo, generally it's fairly straightforward. I think the one thing that I want to get across when I get in touch with a zoo is for them to understand the size of the kit that I'm about to bring, because it's not like, an 8040 or something fairly small and contained that an animal could not tell from a round cell phone. It's a pretty large and sort of potentially intimidating rig. So even if I get permission, of course, when I approach the animals, I pretty much start pointing the blimp at them from 30 meters away and slowly and calmly walk towards them and see what the reaction is. If there's no reaction, then I know that it's more or less okay. And if they start to go away, then I know that it may be me and may be the blimp, but the combination either way doesn't work. So I can kind of, look for something else, I guess. And then, I guess since I moved to Sweden, it's even more complicated because there's a language barrier as well as the weirdness of the task at hand. So in that case, having someone that can introduce you can go a long way. But generally speaking, if I'm going at a zoo, for example, I'll just ask whether it's not okay to show up with a blimp. And if it is okay, then when I'm there, I already have the recorder. So what I do is I try to chase all the keepers and see if anyone knows about any habits that animals may have, get information over feeding times and how animals tend to react to that. A lot of those things are almost impossible to plan because you cannot really get on the phone with a keeper beforehand and say, I'd like to know, the rhythms of your pigs or whatever else. So that's kind of how it tends to work. It's on the phone is pretty hard. Via email is even worse. But in person, it's the best. Only thing is you need to get to the point where you are in person.
That'll be the subtitle of this episode, The Rhythm of Pigs.
Dmitry, when you were approaching the wolf sanctuary, what did you tell them?
Really, I worked with sanctuaries mostly. I've been at the foxes also. And I hope, that I have a history of maybe more than a year of negotiations with a sanctuary for little bears. They pick up just born little bears.
Wow.
Mostly in winter. They appear because some hunters kill their mother, and although there are laws that protect them, still every year there are a number of little bears that appear motherless. And the sanctuary picks these bears and lets them grow up and go to the forest. They reintroduce them back. So, talking with such people and such organizations is rather difficult. They are rather closed. They all say that they are not zoos, so they keep attendance to the possible minimum. If I say that I'm a guy who has some connection with cinema, that will scare them definitely, because they had their relations with film companies that come with all the equipment, or 60 people, and so on. So they say, no. So I say that I'm an enthusiast, a private guy who just loves recording. This is true. When I do these libraries, it's just my private project. So, and I try to explain that I respect all the rules, all the relations with animals, and I'll abide to all this. With the wolves keepers, there were maybe 2 or 3 preliminary visits. They wanted to see how wolves will react at me and how I will behave with the wolves, because there were guys that came and with the intention to show the wolves that they're the real machos. They'll show that wolves who is the master of the universe. But I succeeded to show them that I will really respect the animals, that I will try to be as unobtrusive as possible, just like a tree or just a part of the landscape. And I will just observe and try to record without real intrusion. Wolf keepers really believed me. And it ended up that they left me for a week. They gave me the keys and I was the only person for a week. They came just maybe 2 times. I rented a room in the nearby village, and I came to the wolves every afternoon, stayed for a night, gave them food. Through this week, I really developed some relations with the animals, and they let me in their community.
That's the thing with animals. If you spend time with them, then they get used to you and they start talking to you. And it's very, very difficult to come up to an animal as a stranger and ask it to start talking to you.
That's why with the wolves, I was able to record their interactions in the pack, in pairs and in larger groups. I physically was in the center of their life because they are situated in the enclosures, and there is a central enclosure in which I placed my mix and observed them.
Wow.
Do we want to talk a little bit about equipment and philosophies of recording for a little bit? I know, for instance, Mattia, you are recording at some pretty crazy sample rates. Do you want to talk about your mics and your philosophy behind that?
Yes, let's do it. So when I started recording animals, I wanted to bring the same approach that I had on other libraries that I previously worked on. And since I found a lot of joy in discovering hidden treasures when using mics like the Sanken CO100, I thought, let's do it. Let's try to make this work. And from there on, it was a bit of a chain of events that led me to have a setup that is probably quite convoluted for the task at hand, because generally I think field recordists run pretty light for recording animals. At the moment, for example, if I start with the idea of having a Sanken CO100, which is the origin, I had it coupled with a 8050, which made sense to me because, of course, you want the crispiness of the CO100, but you also want the directionality and dynamic control of the 8050. Then I thought, a lot of sound libraries for animals are not stereo. So let's put a couple of 8040s in there and create a stereo image. And so that's already 4 mics. And from there on, it became a little bit of out of hand type of thing, in the sense that for the second one, for the second one, I started using these mics that are called CMPA from Avisoft, which are made for scientific research on birds and I believe bats. So they are very much ultrasonic focused, and they go up to 200 kilohertz, which meant, recording at 192 on these doesn't make any sense. I mean, it kind of makes sense, but you're clamping the signal so heavily that you're really, if you think about how much they cost, you're using kind of 10% of what they can do. So I had to get my hands on a 384 kilohertz recorder. So, imagine every single bit of equipment that I'm talking about goes into a bag, and all of a sudden you have someone in a zoo that when a monkey calls, you see them running, but it's very cumbersome to run with this kit. So it's pretty crazy. I've done it for a number of animals because I thought it was really worth it, especially for birds. But strangely enough, even for crocodiles, I got really, really good results. It's not like, of course, the signal is not purely ultrasonic or ultrasonically focused, but because they have a lot of kind of, I guess, chuffing type of sounds, it really helps kind of even out a signal that otherwise would be quite low frequency focused. And that's how you tend to hear it in other libraries. This is kind of the kit that I work with at the moment. Sometimes I carry with me micro Uzis just because they can get where sometimes other mics cannot get. And I'm more confident leaving those behind in, say, a bat enclosure or something like that, just in case they get too humid or whatever else. Since the 8040s, I've had a number of experiences where humidity was not exactly friendly to them. Not only they help me getting the sound that I want in terms of stereo image and extended spectrum, but they also help me to manage spaces, meaning that if I don't get the proximity that I normally aim for, with the 8050, I can try to get a little bit more direct, so I can, fade out the sunken tails a lot more dramatically than I would on that kind of mic, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of my happy place at the moment when I'm out in the field, and that's my unhappy place when I come back home and all of a sudden I need to denoise like a billion files. But it's that. I feel like it's the devil that I know at this point, but at the same time, it seems like the recordings are enjoyed, and I don't really mind taking the time to clean everything up and try to get the best possible result by using as many mics as I can fit on one hand and still be mobile, because that's vital.
That is so like how I work too. Like I will throw 1,000 mics up sometimes and just kind of see what mixes and matches. I'm looking at the spec on this CMPA.
Yeah.
Frequency range on this thing is from 2K to 200K.
So yeah.
And it's like the size of an XLR.
Correct.
Like
yeah. And it's funny how it does get signal even below 2Ks, but it's very strange. It's unusable for all that matters, but it's not unusable in a way that you would expect. Meaning, I thought that it had simply a high pass, but no, it kind of like clicks in very strange ways. So it's like it has a cricket inside of it. So
that's wild.
It's a pretty strange mic. Now, of course, I have two because I have a problem, in case you haven't been able to tell by now.
Do you time align everything in post, or do you just kind of like set all the capsules on an equal path?
I used to try the latter, but normally what I do now is I do time align depending on the content. For example, if you don't time align the recording of a territorial call of a lion, I find that you get a lot of the power kind of dissipated, and all of a sudden it's not like the recording is muddy, but it really feels like you keep coming back to, when I was there, it just felt so different, because every transient in the kind of part of the growl was aligned perfectly, and so it was like a submachine gun, to so to say, especially when you have so many mics that are high frequency focused. So now I tend to time align that way. The more the low frequency content, the more I do it that way. I almost never do it with birds because they tend to sound natural no matter what.
Yeah. Do you use AutoLine? Or when I'm doing time align, I'll tend to either use AutoLine Post, or actually the Azimuth plugin inside of RX does a decent job of time alignment as well.
Yeah. Can you remind me, is AutoLine, do you mean like the plugin that is called AutoLine, or the...
Yeah. So it's a dialogue alignment that's supposed to be used for like when you have multiple lavs up, right?
Okay.
And that actually does a really nice job of time alignment.
Kind of like Vocaline. It's not quite what I use. I think what I use is a free plugin that goes for Reaper. I don't remember the exact name. I know it's pretty long and it's part of the SWS features, but the idea is, it listens for a master, compares it to every other track, and goes, this is the delay that I suggest. And it's kind of nice because it's fairly light. So sometimes I will kind of drop it on a item basis, meaning that instead of dropping it, if you're a Pro Tools person, I don't drop it on the track, I drop it on the regions, so that I can kind of be very deliberate, because even if the mics are placed a certain way, the same delay might not work for different takes because the animal moves. So it becomes very, very tricky to get the perfect result with a kind of flat approach, and this is why sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't, and other times I just kind of like have to do a mixture where I align some mics and not others. Or if something just doesn't work in conjunction with another mic, which rarely happens, if it's something like the Sanken, I will probably high pass the signal up to 20 kilohertz, so I'm not even hearing the Sanken in real time, and then I bake it and then I slow it down and I listen and I see if it actually worked.
Dmitry, let's talk about the guinea pigs for a second, because they are pretty cool sounding on their own, but they really shine when you slow them down.
Yeah, thank you. So, as far as alignment is mentioned, with the guinea pigs, I went pretty nerdy. So I use AutoLine Post, and I even went as far as slowing down it 4 times. And then applying the AutoLine Post.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's cool.
Maybe it's overkill. I think that it does the alignment even at normal speed rather nicely. The idea of the guinea pigs came from Jason Jennings. He contacted me on Slack, and he's seen that I do some animals. And he asked whether I have the recordings or can I do some stuff. And so we discussed what he needed. He needed just the normal speed, but rather close up. And I tried doing close-ups, and my rig, which was developed during this project, is like this. There's a cardioid from Nevaton, this MC59C small mic. Then on top of that sits another Nevaton mic. It's called Twin. There's only one sample of it. I have it. It looks like a figure of 8, but in fact, it's two cardioids facing the opposite sides at 180 degrees. So I get 3 cardioids, one facing front and 2 facing to the sides. This is my LCR for the normal frequency range. And then on top of that sits one CO100K. So this rig was mostly used for the group recordings. For the single ones, I just used the mono, because the peaks themselves are rather small, and so I consider them just a point source. I don't think that they need stereo width when there's one peak. The pigs themselves appear to be an extremely difficult species for recording compared to the wolves. Wolves are big. It's difficult to get very close to them. But at least they are loud. They are not cats, but they are not so noisy. Guinea pigs have a rather heavy body on very short, stiff legs with big claws. So this thing is moving constantly, and in a normal cage, it's a storm of useless sound. Very difficult to get the vocals. So it was an enormous number of attempts to minimize the sound of their steps and their constant bumping into the walls of the cage. So I've built a special enclosure using bus straps as the walls, and there was a multi-layered flooring underneath to dampen those steps. And the pigs were put into this enclosure, and then the mic was lowered there from the top. So then in post, I did the normal range stuff separately, the sunken, and then there's a stereo mix to facilitate the usage of this mix at any possible speed.
Yeah.
So they sound cool both at normal speed, at twice speed, and slowed 4 times.
They seemed like they were vocal. I don't know if you were doing anything to cause them to talk so much, but they were awfully chatty.
They were chatty when we were acquiring them. Then they got completely silent for about 2 weeks. Yes, and we had to wait for them to adapt to the new environment. They sat completely silent. Then they start to talk to each other, but they're small and they're fast. And their behavior also develops very fast. They fastly get excited and then fastly get tired and silent again. So you need to catch these periods of activity, or just put them separate. For instance, if you have 2 friends, put one apart and the other one will call his friend.
Yeah.
Then put them together. They just start interacting. Then one of them produces this very low frequency bubbling sound that is used either for expressing his dominance over the other members of the collective, or it may be the sound of pre-mating game. Really, we didn't want any young ones, so we prevented them from real mating. So everything that's in the library is pre-mating story.
So you were about to say everything that is in the library is frustration.
Yeah. Still, we had. They didn't sit just in our home. Every day we let them for a walk on the lawn, So it was a rather interesting story to keep them in our house, to feed them, to take care of them, to let them out for a walk and then bring them back. Otherwise, they would talk so much. Also, there was the one guinea pig that reacted. First, we thought that she reacts to the sound of vegetables being cut. So she thought that she will be fed, and she called for meal. And we trained her, and then tried to cause her squealing, optimistic squealing sounds this way. It appeared that her reflex is a bit more complex. First, she had to hear that the fridge is being opened. Then the vegetables being cut, and then she meets the sound. Only this way. So they are really, really funny.
Thinking about the idea of the patience that is needed to record animals, you mentioned that you went weeks with them not making any noise. Mattia, do you want to talk about when you went to go record the Stanley crane?
Yeah, sure. That was, again, if I remember correctly, it was the first collection that I worked on. And this was one of the first trips I did alone, and just showed up at the zoo. And, sometimes it will happen that the chatty animals are chatty as you pass by, and you immediately manage to get what you need. And you can kind of move on. Other times you pass in front of an enclosure, the animal is silent, you wait for a little, and they will probably not be that chatty, so you keep going. It's very hard to predict which animal will be chatty and which one will not. In this case, what the worst case scenario that can happen is that an animal happens to be making the sound that will make 3 times a day exactly as you pass in front of it. So all of a sudden you have this huge expectation of, okay, the sound was incredible, I'm here, so I'll just stick around for...
Do it again, animal.
Exactly. And so I think I was there for recording this specific animal for something like 6 hours. 6 hours of just kind of telling myself, okay, this is just the last take. I'll just be here for another 30 minutes. And then I'll just walk away. I'll go to record a few other animals. And then I'll come back and see if maybe I can get some more. Oh, I'm back already. So it was kind of never ending. It got to the point where I think it was like the end of the day. And I spent the entire day in front of this enclosure. And I still remember to this day that what I should have done, at least like thinking about it just in hindsight, there were capybaras that were very vocals there in that place. And I think I just didn't know how hard it would be to record a capybara in the future. And to be fair, I've never encountered that kind of crane since. So I'm sure that what I did manage to record is fairly rare. But capybaras have this very strange kind of miniature horse, eagle, owl kind of sound going on, which is very interesting. And I thought on the day that it might not have been that easy to record, but it definitely must have been harder to record that crane. So yeah, it's just funky how these mistakes are very hard to avoid when you are in the spot and you're thinking, well, but I think I have six takes, and if I have 8, then maybe I can make 2 files, but I would really like to have 10. And so like you keep thinking about these things, and maybe one goes off and you're like, was it off axis? I don't know if it was off axis, but I cannot stop and monitor because if it will make the sound again, then I'll never forgive myself. So there's all these things, and especially with that crane, I remember starting to things finally picked up when I managed to record it with my phone. Because, mix-pre, it's very hard to then kind of immediately store the file on a computer and play it back to the bird. But if you manage to get a video of the bird with your phone, then you can actually play it back with audio and kind of put the phone behind your back sometimes. And that kind of prevents, in my head at least, it prevents the directionality of the sound from being clear and the origin of the sound from being clear. And so the animal starts to be more interested in these calls, and they may be able to have a conversation with themselves. That makes sense. So that is what saved me that day. That kind of made it all worth it, because I learned this kind of interesting lesson about how to cut on time. When you have an animal that doesn't make a sound very often, you can kind of try and create a situation where the animal will make the sound a little bit more often.
That's a super cool trick.
Yeah, it's it doesn't work with everything, but interestingly enough, it can work even on animals as big as lions if you have the right speakers at the right distance. So I've had the same kind of approach for recording lion territorial calls, and we had like a Jeep with huge speakers, all doors open, and we pretty much blasted these territorial calls. The previous day I was there to try and record them, and they didn't make a single sound. But 2 minutes into the playback from the Jeep, which was like 300 meters away, and they started vocalizing, and at that point I was next to them. Probably the craziest story that I have to this day. I have something like a half-hour video of just me being next to them and them calling, looking at the horizon, thinking, I probably need to, like Dmitry was saying, for the guinea pigs, different animals, but sort of same behavior of I need to assert myself here. But luckily, it was always kind of pointing at the distance, so there was no menacing tones towards me. In fact, I felt pretty invisible at that time because the animal would just kind of go backwards and forwards without looking at me at all.
I was going to say, what does it feel like as a human being standing next to a lion in that proximity that is doing its territorial calls like that? Like there has to be something there.
It's incredibly humbling, I think. It's very different if you're recording roars, because when you're recording roars, you're just having to bypass, that survival instinct of flinching and closing your eyes and trying to move, etc. But with the territorial calls, they are very different. It's just a different type of sound. It still shows the size of the animal, but it really doesn't feel meant to be threatening in the short term, if that makes sense. So I can tell you, I can clearly recall my chest vibrating when hearing it. And because I was monitoring with gun range headphones, so quite a lot of padding, I could feel all of that, but I could not really hear it because I was monitoring fairly quiet. So it didn't add up in my head. And then when I got home, I thought, wow, okay, that's kind of how it sounded. But interestingly enough, it took me a really long time to mix all the mics in such a way that I felt it was kind of representative of what I experienced on that day, because I felt it so much more than I heard it. And so that was really, really interesting.
What about with wolves, Dmitry?
Regarding the territorial calls, the howling is their territorial call. The territory is kept by the pack, and so the pack howling designates that this is their territory, and the other packs hear them and don't cross the borders. Regarding the roars, the growls, it's very intimidating. The alpha couple, when they interact with each other, and that's not a quarrel. They're just expressing their love and some lovely game, but they may be so loud and so scary at that moment. There was a very scary situation with the wolves when the two wolves, by accident, one of them jumped over the 3-meter fence and appeared in the enclosure of the alpha couple, and the two males quarreled, and I had to do something with that. No one else was present. So the keepers of the sanctuary asked me to try to lure the alpha female into the enclosure where I was sitting. And they said that...
And you were like, okay.
Yeah, the alpha male is jealous. He will follow his spouse. And then you just close the gate, and the two males will be separated. First, I just forgot that the equipment is still with me. And I tried to lure the alpha couple while the equipment was still there. Then I remembered, pulled out the equipment. This all took, I think, 4 hours. But I succeeded.
Wow.
Wow.
Damn.
And that was quite an experience in this situation, to be with this alpha couple in the same enclosure.
Wow.
That was it. But I don't remember that I was scared at the moment. I was just concentrating on the task, that I need to separate the two males, otherwise they will injure themselves or kill themselves. I remembered that maybe something was recorded just when I separated them and left this enclosure very slowly, moving along the fence out of the enclosure where the alpha was captured. And this accident was recorded and made maybe 1/3 of the library then. And I thought that I have the moral right to use the recordings.
Wow.
Wow.
They were not intended. I didn't want to provoke something like this. But no one was injured, so I had the right to use it. So these are the quarrel between the alpha male and this big young polar wolf. Everything was successfully documented.
Wow.
That sounds very intense.
That sounds so crazy.
The main idea, what I can share from my own experience, I'm not a brave man at all. What I can recommend in this situation, that just be as calm as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Watch everything. Be ready for everything. Don't be scared. I remember that keeping the mic too close when this guy is roaring is physically difficult. As Mattia said, you instinctively back off when you see this.
Yeah.
These teeth and this sound. Overall, wolves and I think other animals just feel your intention. They feel if you are aggressive or scared, and they reply with aggression. When you keep as calm as possible, they trust you. And I was lucky to keep myself as calm as possible.
Impressive.
Yeah, I feel the same way about that statement over, animals being able to read you.
Yeah.
In a way. At the same time, I keep thinking the idea of separating the two males to get the male and the female in a cage with you.
Yeah.
You are a male, so it's just that sometimes animals will not make that much of a distinction in between, humans and themselves. So to an extent, I feel like I would have been very worried trying that out. But I guess in the moment, you know that it should be fine.
I see what we are talking about. Speaking about the polar wolf, he can really behave like you say. He can treat a human like a rival, like another male. This alpha male is really a very clever, a very experienced wolf. His temper and his character is really, really well developed. That is why other wolves consider him the master of the pack. He really can control himself and the situation around him. He is not absolutely not stupid, and he controls everything. That's why the keepers told me that I can trust him.
Mm-hmm.
He will not attack me in this situation if I keep myself calm and predictable.
Wow.
Yeah.
He is really, really, really different. Wolves have this family hierarchy, which is very well developed in the wolf society. The master of the pack is a really noble guy, I'd say, about this wolf.
Yeah.
Huh.
Awesome. Well, there's a million things that we'd like to talk to you guys about. We might have to incorporate a part 2 to this talk. With that, let's wrap it up. Thank you very much for talking to us today. It was really interesting to hear your adventures with the animals, and also obviously super interesting to hear the sounds that came out of it. We'll put links to your various libraries up on the episode page for this one. So
Yes, beautiful work both of you did.
Thank you very much, Dmitry, Mattia. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great evening.
A true pleasure.
That was a fun talk. I'm always amazed at people who have such a good grasp of English as a second language. I would be lost if we had to do that interview in Russian. This episode was edited and mixed by Andrew Malad. Andrew is a Los Angeles-based freelance audio engineer and music producer. You can follow them on Twitter or Instagram at ShubuTime, spelled S-H-U-B-U time. Thanks so much, Andrew. It was awesome working with you. Andrew will be getting a free copy of the amazing sound library Sonic Springs from Katrina Amsler. You can find a link to this library on this episode's page. On behalf of Mattia, Dmitry, and René, my name is Tim Muirhead. Thanks for listening to Tonebenders. Stay tuned after the credits to listen to some of the amazing recordings we talked about during this episode. First up will be the guinea pigs, then a selection of animals from Mattia. Finally, nice wolf recordings to take us out.
Tonebenders is produced by Timothy Muirhead, René Coronado, and Teresa Morrow. Theme music is by Mark Strait. Send your emails to info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter via @thetonebenders and join Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook. Support this podcast. You can use our links when you shop at Amazon or B&H, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click the support button. Thanks for listening.
Are you looking for more audio-related podcasts to listen to? Tonebenders is part of the Audio Podcast Alliance, featuring a hand-picked selection of the very best podcasts about sound. Be sure to hear the latest episodes from our friends in the community at audiopodcast.org.
Down.